Okay. Good afternoon, guys. Good afternoon. Hi, guys. How are you doing today? Good. That's good to hear. So today we're going to be presenting a little presentation about cracking cognition.
How dynamic engagement of cognitive control affects language processing. So who are we and what's our research? Hi, my name is Jurit Sakura and I'm a Communications Arts and Science Disorders major interested in pursuing a career in audiology.
Hi, guys. I'm Aya Hassan. I'm also a junior at Brooklyn College, also studying communication sciences and disorders, but this time I want to pursue speech-language pathology.
Due to our future careers, we are both interested in language and took part in Professor Frederickson's independent study. Together, we explore the fascinating world of language and language processing, and today we're excited to take you into our class and show the research we conducted exploring the impact on cognitive control on language processing. We conducted our research through a series of experiments that we did ourselves, as well as analyzing participants' data and reading research articles. Now let's delve into our findings. But before we do that, we would like to discuss language. So language is complex. This is because we use language all the time without actually thinking about it. For example, let's look at these sentences. Anna loves Tom because. Anna annoys Tom because. Isn't it strange that these sentences are similar, but they have different expectations? Let's click on it. As you can see, the expectations for these are different. So with Anna loves Tom because, what do you think the expectation is? The expectation, according to research, is he. And for Anna annoys Tom because the expectation, according to research, is she. Now, why is it that they're different? This is because we use verb implicit causality to expect who the sentence is about. So according to this, the verb loves Tom makes it so that the next pronoun is he, and for Anna annoys Tom, the next pronoun of Anna annoys Tom is she. Now what about sentences that aren't expected? Anna annoys Tom because she, Anna annoys Tom because he. As you can see in these sentences, we don't have verb implicit causality where we use expectations to predict the next pronoun. As a result of these unexpected sentences, it makes it more difficult to process according to Korneef and Van Berkom.
So what we actually discovered based on research and based on different studies that we looked at is that language, we use different abilities, non-linguistic abilities to actually quote unquote do language. So I'm just gonna give you guys a little example. Let's look at this trial right here. It's called the Stroop task. Can you guys tell me what color this is based on what you see, not what you read? Anybody? The font, sorry. Yellow. That's correct. You see how you guys said that quickly, no hesitation? What about this one? Can you tell me red? I heard red. Okay, that was pretty quick. What they actually discovered is that people do hesitate on that, and that's because we have something called our cognitive control. The cognitive control center is essentially the ability in which you're able to go against your initial judgment. So I know you guys said it quickly, but in reality, most people, again, as I said, tend to hesitate on this. They'll actually confuse it with yellow because that's what they see, that's what they read. That's the initial thought that comes into their mind. And that's when the cognitive control center actually comes in and it's like, no, this isn't yellow, this is red. And we have Shu and Novik and other researchers, they discovered that we actually use the cognitive control center when it comes to conducting language. So one research that they actually looked at is they took a group of people and they had people listen to ambiguous sentences. So for example, this sentence right here, put the frog onto the napkin. When you hear that, your first initial thought is that you're gonna look at the frog that's off the napkin and the goal is the napkin, to put the frog on the napkin. But when they listen to the rest of the sentence onto the box, they have to go against their initial judgment. The first thought that they had Hence, they had to use their cognitive control ability to actually realize that the goal is on the box, not on the napkin. Does that make sense to everyone? Yes? Okay, I see nods, so that's good. And what they actually wanted to know is if the Stroop trials would help with, if like, they wanted to know if when your cognitive control center is activated, if that actually helps you process language more quickly. So what they did is they actually incorporated Stroop trials in between each of these ambiguous sentences and between the sentences that Jaritza had mentioned earlier. So what we wanted to find out is, does the cognitive control center help with mispredictions across clauses? And again, we use the sentences that Jaritza used earlier, so stuff like Anna annoys Tom because he, or Anna loves Tom because she. We wanted to know if when the cognitive control center is activated, does that actually help? Does it actually help with language processing, language comprehension, that type of stuff? So what we did is we looked at 3 different experiments. Experiment 1 was just the basic one. We had a whole bunch of sentences. So again, the sentences that Jitsa mentioned earlier. And we just wanted to see how people would react to that. What was their initial judgment? What was their initial thought? Experiment 2 is when we copy what the researchers did, we'd actually incorporate Stroop trials. So what we did about with like the yellow and red, we put that in between the sentences because we wanted to see if when the cognitive control ability is activated in between each sentence, does that actually help with language production?
Similarly to experiment 2, we did the same process, except with experiment 3, we wanted to see comprehension. For this, we used sentences called the DAX, which is basically a nonsense word we use a nonsense word that avoids giving hints about what the sentence or who the sentence is about. Now, we did this between Stroop trials, which were unambiguous, and ambiguous, which was harder. And we wanted to see the comprehension.
So going back to experiment number 1, our basic prediction was that English speakers like you and I, we make more mistakes in sentence repetition when the ending is unexpected. When the ending is unexpected. So, for example, again, the sentences that Jurtsa had mentioned earlier. And in fact, we actually have a video here to show you how the experiment was conducted. So we had a sentence like this one. So Jenna derided Landon because he, and we wanted to see if, sorry, I'm just trying to bring up the video. Okay, so I don't know how to bring it up on the screen, but basically what she did was we wanted to see how she would continue the rest of the sentence. And we essentially got the results that when it is unexpected, people tend to make more mistakes. So as you could see in the graph that I'm going to show you right now. When the sentence is unexpected as compared to expected or controlled, people tend to make more mistakes, which is what we predicted. It's not shocking, it's nothing new to us, it makes sense. But what would happen if we actually had the cognitive control center activated? So we wanted to know if high cognitive control activation would improve performance for English speakers, again, like you and I, with if it will improve sentence production and sentence comprehension when the ending is unexpected. So again, we had a sentence like Jenna derided Landon because he, and we wanted to see how the participants would complete the sentence. But this time what we did is we included Stroop trials in between each of these sentences. So we maybe had like 2, 3, 4 Stroop trials. So we'd expect them to tell us the color of the word that's being presented. Again, we would want to show you, but technical difficulties. And our basic predictions is that, again, there's going to be more errors in unexpected versus expected. It's just something that makes sense, and based on what we've seen in experiment number 1. But we also wanted to see if there's going to be less errors in the unexpected sentences after the Stroop trials. And lo and behold, we were actually correct. There were more errors overall in the unexpected sentences, which again makes sense. However, we noticed that there were fewer errors in the unexpected sentences following ambiguous Stroop trials as compared to the unambiguous Stroop trials. So that just goes to show us that what previous research said is correct, that when your cognitive control center is activated, your understanding of language improves. And what we also found out that when your cognitive control center is activated, language production improves.
That's great. Now that we learned about language productions having effects on cognitive control, we want to know if the same thing is true when understanding sentences. So our research question here is, does high cognitive control activation improve performance in understanding English sentences when the sentence ending is unexpected? Unfortunately, we don't have the video, but the video showed expected and unexpected DAX sentences after an ambiguous or unambiguous Stroop trial. And the unambiguous Stroop trials are basically like one where there's a clear answer, and the ambiguous ones are one that there's more than one answer. So our predictions are similar as the previous experiments. So we predicted more errors overall in the unexpected condition, and then we also predicted following an ambiguous Stroop test, there will be a reduction in errors in the unexpected condition. Now, if you look at the graph, there's something unusual. Unlike the previous two experiments, there are more errors in the expected condition, which is supposed to be the easier one. And if you look at the other one, the unexpected condition, we were correct about our second prediction. There is a decrease in errors after an ambiguous Stroop test. Now let's dive into more about the experiment. So as we said before, people should be more correct in the expected condition, but they were more wrong. Unfortunately, we don't have an answer for this as there is more research is necessary to understand why that is. But one possibility is that the responses were time limited, as when we performed the experiment, we found ourselves rushing for time. Now, as far as the cognitive control effects, there were fewer errors following ambiguous Stroop tests in the unexpected sentences. We expected this as what Aya said, that the lingering effects of cognitive control helps assist sentences. But however, there weren't as many less errors as expected. Now, for the expected condition, there were more errors following ambiguous Stroop tests, and this may be due to confusion as from the ambiguous Stroop test, leading people to make more mistakes. Now let's talk about our general discussion. So our results show for experiment 1 that people are worse at repeating sentences when the ending is unexpected. For experiment 2, they get better at repeating unexpected sentences when cognitive control is activated. And for experiment 3, they also get a little bit better at understanding unexpected sentences when cognitive control is activated. But unexpectedly, people are worse at understanding expected sentences than unexpected sentences. As we said previously, more research is needed for this. But as you can see overall from the results, they demonstrate that cognitive control does indeed, in fact, affect language processing, and the results vary depending on the language task.
So that's essentially the end of our project, but I will want to say before, definitely this was something interesting because it made me realize that there's more things that there's more to consider when thinking about language. It isn't just words, it isn't just noise. There's a lot, whether it be mentally, physically. So I would definitely say this semester with being with Professor Fredrickson and within this independent course, I've learned a lot.
Similar to Aya, I had no idea how complex language processing was, but after performing the research and being a part of this class, I was able to gain more knowledge and a better understanding, which I will be able to use in my future career or in my personal life. Thank you.
Do you guys have any questions? No? Okay, thank you.
Thank God we're done.
but I don't want to keep just waiting. We have about 45 minutes for this, so would somebody give me like a little, maybe to give me a heads up and we're like 5 minutes away from finishing? Would that be okay? Well, everybody, welcome. Thank you so much for coming. If you all put in the chat, like if you're where you're from, or what. If you can put in the chat like where you're from, it's nice for us to know, especially if you're not doing the camera. It's nice for us to know who's out there. If you can't put your camera on, that's also cool. We're really excited that you're here. And I think we can jump right in. And we have until 4:30, I understand. So the title of this talk is The Power of Translation, Bringing Latin American Feminism to Brooklyn College. And there we go. So this came out of a course that I taught last semester, and now William and Alma were in. And we were invited by Professor Bernard Villanos, who couldn't be here today. But Professor Bernard Villanos is a focus on, she's also an artist president, she's a focus on women's studies and gender studies. And she's originally from Chile in South America. And she brought a very special guest to Brooklyn who is a feminist who has become a very important figure in the feminism in Chile. And Professor Llanos presented to our course the possibility of translating the event in person. So the first thing we're going to do is maybe go through a little bit of background about what we're working on, what it's all about. William found us really very interesting from Spanish, but this is by a feminist artist. Anybody who's interested, I can find you a really good article about it. And with a lot of things levels, like no, motherhood is something that will be desired or won't be anything at all. Femicide, and just kind of the context in which our visitor came. And it all started out in the fall of 2023. Again, invited the feminist, the feminist component part of St. Charles, to come and inform the reading and conversation about the work, which is very much at the intersection of culture, feminism, and political change. William, maybe you were, Alma could describe it a little bit, what the context was of your participation.
Sure. I'll go. So, well, where do you want me to start? Okay, so,
How did this whole thing happen?
When you said what happened, I'm sorry, you went out on my end.
Sorry, just like how this happened and how you progress to get involved in a special way with this assignment. Because, just so everybody knows, Professor Llanos came to me.
don't even think happens in Latin America. So that's what really kind of drew me to this project. And I also saw it as an opportunity to network. Why would you not want to be friends with someone else with a certain event? And for those of you who don't know who she is, definitely get on board. Like look her up. She's really really good.
We're gonna, I actually got a bunch of videos, we're gonna look at her a little bit, so that everybody here can see what a cool project this is and what, why we wanted to show it off, well, why we wanted to bring it to the expo, because, at least I thought it was interesting, kind of an unusual opportunity that students in class can get to do like a real world assignment. And so these two, brave students worked, and we'll talk about this a little bit more towards the end, but like the big challenge was to, undertake the transition to regular class. But these two guys, got up on stage and did what was really a, very professional event that is, normally called professional transit, which you do. So it was also kind of an experience where we took something from the classroom into a more real world context. And it really was a real world context, even though it's just people going home. Cheryl and Ed is a very well-known professional artist. But Alma, I also wanted to ask you, we were talking the other day, so we've been talking about this presentation, and at some point we talked a little bit
Running? Give us a thumbs up, go ahead.
Okay, awesome. Hello to the camera. So my name is Rachel Pearson. I will be performing 2 poems today. The first one is titled Blue Petals Falling, and it is in honor of my cat who unfortunately passed early this September. I had her for 16 years, so this is for her. Blue petals falling. You filled my world with color, but now the leaves cry blue. I stand alone in the meadow of life, and in silence I scream for you. With love I stared into your eyes as your life slipped away, as your heart stopped to beat. I saw your suffering dissipate, your pain replaced with peace. The field gave way and I crumbled. I fell to my knees and wept. I held your corpse up to my heart. My heart alone now beats. I heard the air escape your lungs as I hugged you one last time. I closed my eyes and I am haunted. I hear the echoes in my mind. You're gone. The warmth faded from your body. Your color disappeared. Your little nose and paws went cold. The pink no longer there. I rested your head on my shoulder. I braced your neck with care. You're gonna be okay, baby. I will always be right here. Blue petals fall as a river wraps around me. The land, it feels so empty since the wind whisked you away. Your spirit no longer with me. Ashes left in your place. But no matter how many seasons pass, your memory will never fade. The second poem is a completely different topic. The second poem is titled Senseless. Touch my bare skin and I will burn. Hold me in your arms and I will break. Kiss me and I will die, but I don't care. Be the artist, I give you control. Mold me with your passion. Hold my soul in your hands. Let me be your greatest accomplishment. You spark in me something I can't explain, a simultaneous feeling of overwhelming happiness and sheer terror. It sits heavy on my chest, disorienting my mind. You bring out a side of me I didn't know I had, the animal I didn't know I was. Around you, I lose all sense of self, lost in a wave of infatuation. You are everything I think of and everything I don't want to think of. I should stop, but I don't want to. Thank you.
That's what. I think this is pretty straightforward. All we have to do is unmute. Right? Is it the right one?
No.
Not the right one.
I found the best one of them I could.
We'll video mute that until, I guess. You see the cursor? There it is. And is it this one? On both?
No, that one's something else.
Maybe this one? Come on.
That one's mine. I think.
This one?
Yeah.
Key? No, it can't be key. It's this one. This one?
No.
Oh, come on. Yep, I'm out the way.
Yeah, this one's mine. Yeah.
Is the file on the clip?
Maybe I could like send it as a slide, or I could log in.
Yeah.
To my Google Slides. Yeah.
You need to unmute the screen. Got it. Touch nothing.
Alphabetically by last name, so I'm gonna go left.
Yeah, it's just not going up. Maybe.
You guys want to switch? Maybe they go before you while you try.
Yeah, we could do that. Instead, yeah, so I pressed slideshow and then I pressed video, but it wasn't working.
I guess you have to talk about more.
It's meant to be.
Oh, they really tried to fly.
Yeah, I don't know. I was doing that same exact thing and then it just wasn't working. Yeah, maybe X that out.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Alay Sackett, and I'll be presenting Artificial Intelligence in Healthcare, a Moral and Legal Perspective. So my research question is, how can AI into healthcare be managed through moral and legal standards in terms of, like, how do we discuss the challenges and privacy biases with AI into healthcare, and how do we manage those privacy and legal concerns with that from a moral and legal perspective itself? So I had two interviews to help me with this question. One is from Dr. Robert Wachter of UCSF, and another is from Professor Jenkins of California Polytechnical Institute. Section 1 is about the potentials of AI integration into healthcare itself. Part 1 includes patient health records. Part 2 is diagnostics and data. And Part 3 is potential equitable distribution of AI into healthcare. So for patient health records, AI integration into healthcare introduces new hospital operational efficiencies, and it actually changes job dynamics through optimizing the organization of the patient health records. So AI may actually improve the mundane existing jobs through automating routine tasks, and this would allow for medical professionals to basically focus on more complex patient care. And the automation of these mundane tasks would actually enable AI to help doctors communicate more effectively with other hospitals through an overarching artificial intelligence system, and it would expedite many different notoriously slow processes, including patient care, checkup care, and follow-up appointments. And one of the quotes that I had from Dr. Robert Wachter actually was like how at the end of the day, some doctors have over 200 messages to answer, and it's literally impossible. So an overarching AI system to kind of triage those messages to the right people, right place, right time, it would definitely help out a lot. And for diagnostics and data, one of the things AI does that's really well is analyzing extreme amounts of clinical information, and this has potentially endless amounts of applications into AI assigned per patient. And it could, so AI being assigned per patient would allow it to basically be personalized AI help and care for that patient. And for digital health records, it could actually help enhance the efficiency. And this is really important for time-sensitive cases where, for example, if a patient is having a seizure and AI is connected to its blood work, the patient's blood work, the patient's heart rate, etc., it could potentially warn doctors of an oncoming medical episode and potentially save lives. And AI's analysis of this patient data, as I said before, could lead to more accurate diagnoses and have tailor-made predictive models. And according to the article, The Role of Artificial Intelligence in Healthcare, a Structured Literature Review, data mining and big data are a big forward step in implementing these AI applications. And if we apply these applications into healthcare, it would achieve many technological applications through supporting doctors specifically in decision making. And AI's data-driven analysis would also help. And one of the quotes that Dr. Robert Waschter actually gave me was how one of the biggest innovations that AI could make is through a digital scribe, which is basically a hospital note taker. And it's going to make doctors much more happier to be able to communicate with the patients. And potential equitable distribution of AI into healthcare. So this is basically completely contingent upon the fact of how AI is going to be implemented into healthcare in the future. AI assisted treatment could potentially be as accessible to anybody as basic internet. And AI would actually be able to bridge the gaps between generational socioeconomic challenges with all patients receiving higher quality care. And this would help solve the ethical dilemma of patients basically dying because they don't have access in time of proper healthcare resources. And as Dr. Robert Waschter said, um, basically some doctors in certain areas are not as good as you'd like them to be. And with AI, it would bridge that gap through essentially delinking the patient with the constraints of their geography. And this would potentially help, at least in a digital way, save their life, or at least have access to better care than what they're currently having access to. And often in healthcare, it's these minor or seemingly marginal details that make the difference between life and death in millions of people per year. Now, section 2 is challenges of AI integration, and this includes HIPAA and data privacy, potential for illegal activities, liability issues, and the regulatory constraints of both the public and private sector, and how each one could actually affect AI and its integration into healthcare. So for HIPAA and data privacy, we would have to ensure that AI is compliant with HIPAA at all times. So this would require any and all AI used technology in HIPAA in hospitals to be compliant with HIPAA, or like not at all. So it would only be used for mundane tasks, because one violation of HIPAA privacy rules would essentially make all the dominoes fall in AI and healthcare. And there's also an potentially increased possibility for AI to be allow hospitals to be more susceptible to hacks and attacks. And Professor Jenkins actually highlighted this information when he talked to me about the garbage in, garbage out problem, where the importance of feeding quality code into the AI for explicit information to help avoid misinterpretations could actually, if information gets misinterpreted, it could exacerbate the existing issues of healthcare itself. And it's not guaranteed that patients will actually trust AI, so with that information in the first place. And if our AI already is fully integrated into a hospital and they have that information, it could cause major legal dramas and scandals. So for potential illegal activities, one of the things that AI can do, unfortunately, is with unauthorized data access, the AI system could be hacked, and that data that it has will be sold. Insurance frauds and scams are already a prevalent problem in healthcare, so having AI could potentially make these issues exponentially worse. And if AI is going to be integrated into healthcare, it's going to be very costly. And with these costly security measures, it begs the question of, is fully integrating AI into healthcare more trouble than what it's worth? And there's also going to be liability issues. So there needs to be a clear guideline between who's liable, the government, corporations, in making these life-changing decisions. And there needs to be full transparency in what data AI has, what AI doesn't have. And this would essentially require a new framework for which all hospitals need to essentially regulate AI. And this accountability would it would need it to be address these liability challenges. And part of AI is mitigating the risk of the patient, the risk of a patient's a patient going through essentially damage with the hospital itself. And AI would need to learn the balance between minimizing these errors. Like for example, if a doctor suggests something, the AI would also need to learn how to suggest something while minimizing, again, those errors and recommending certain procedures. And in my conversation with Professor Jenkins, he says that the patient needs to have a say in what exactly they're being allowed their data to have. And yeah. So these are some stats As you can see, there's an exponential growth in trending AI in scientific academia, and it's essentially irrefutable. It has a growth of 5.12% per year, and the point of this is essentially to say AI is here to stay, and it's about how we manage it. And this obviously shows the worldwide impact. So the darker blue represents the quantity of the amount of research being done for AI. The red lines are collaborations between countries. And it just shows how these countries are networked and talking to each other about AI. So hopefully with this application, it could be used so that these countries could talk to each other and potentially save lives through AI integrated into healthcare. So concluding questions. So one of the things that I have to say about this is I do think that in general, AI will enhance the quality of patient care. And I do think it should be integrated into healthcare because if it saves one life, then I feel like its worth is invaluable. And there are other existing problems such as bias and discrimination. And it begs the question of will AI already solve them, or will these socioeconomic gaps be worsened by AI? And this also begs the question of a clash of interest. Will AI be available because it helps the patient, or will it be available because it helps the potential bottom line of a company? And which one's the actual main priority? And these are my references. Thank you.
What is AI?
So AI is artificial intelligence, and it's used in different computing systems. It basically exacerbates the exact amount of information, takes all that information, and makes predictive learning off of that.
And the difference between that and just a standard predictive model?
Well, the difference between, the AI I'm referring to is essentially much smarter than any normal predictive model. One of the things that's the main difference, in my opinion, is its potential to be integrated by creating smarter ideas through helping doctors.
What is smarter?
Well, smarter is basically essentially learning patient patterns, learning these different patterns and analyzing them.
Okay, and let me ask one more question.
Sure.
And what would you suggest would be, because you mentioned garbage in, garbage out, which is
Right.
one of the reasons we have biases in healthcare, and that is one of the big problems with AI in general. How would you suggest, or what problems do you see arising from the fact that, for the most part, patients don't know what they're talking about when they, because you mentioned you mentioned it going through messages. A lot of times, patients kind of don't know what they're talking about when it comes to speaking with doctors, or they just don't know the same terminology that the doctors do, and don't know to what degree different words mean different things, at least in the medical setting.
Right. So you're saying how to solve that?
Yeah.
Well, that's one of the things that AI would have to learn how to do, is bridging between those gaps of essentially taking what the patient feels, translating that into medical terminology, and then saying that to the doctor. Now, the problem with that potentially could be if the AI misinterprets what the patient said, and then after that says something to the doctor that isn't exactly equivalent to what the patient said in the first place, and then legal problems could potentially happen from that. Any other questions?
Yeah, I was just wondering, right? So, of course, with this AI, presumably it's going to process a lot of personal information that's private. My question is, right, what sort of entity, right, is needed to safeguard that information, right? And what are the steps to getting that sort of infrastructure up and running?
That could be solved through 3 ways. Number one is government infrastructure, which could allow for basically new technology that the government creates where it won't allow any of those issues to happen. Second is by corporation, and third is by potentially a third party. Third party could essentially make this technology where any of those issues wouldn't happen as well.
Okay, I think we're out of time.
Yeah, I did stay for a long. I'm sorry.
I am hopeful this is the right one.
Yes.
Oh, good.
Bork really seems to like making an appearance today.
Yeah.
From the beginning. There you go. And this will work if you want to use it as to advance the
Oh,
slide.
awesome. Thank you.
Great. Cool. Gotta love technology. Okay. Um, Hi, I'm back again. Rachel Pearson here with,
Sarah Dagme.
and we will be discussing The Case Against Political Judging by Robert H. Bork. So just to give a little bit of a summary, in The Case Against Political Judging, Robert H. Bork discusses the role he feels that judges should play in the context of legislation, and that is to stay out of it. His argument is geared towards not the original intent, but the words of the Constitution. And he makes this very clear throughout his entire writing. He constantly uses the term word or text. He states the importance of the generality of the law in order to be applicable throughout the generations. Bork worries about political judging and judicial overreach, which we will get into later, both possible outcomes if judges take on the role of legislation.
So an important aspect when reading texts is considering the writer's personal background, views, and history. So we wanted to highlight a few aspects of Robert Bork.
Robert H. Bork really wanted to make an appearance and not leave.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Yes.
So he lived from 1927 till 2012, was a former federal judge, a rejected Supreme Court nominee, a staunch Republican, and conservative legal scholar who advocated an originalist reading of the First Amendment.
Okay, so within his article, what Bork is basically just saying is that the Constitution should be interpreted based off the wording, the text, so that's going to be one of our arguments, and the generality of the Constitution is very important. Bork's main worry is about judicial overreach, and he feels that in order to prevent this, we really need to create laws that are as neutral as possible. This will basically allow generations worth of will allow a law to go through generations without it being a problem. Okay, so we're going to go a little bit more into should the law be interpreted based on an originalist view or based on the political views of the time. Oh, okay, yes, sorry. Okay, so the position that I'll be taking is against political judging, so I'm going to be on Bork's side for this. Just to state, ahead of time, we don't necessarily agree with our positions per se, but this is what was handed to us. So the position I'll be taking is against political judging with a focus on the original wording of the law. The judicial branch should abide by the powers they have of interpreting the law and its constitutionality. They are meant to focus on the text and not their opinions on the matter. This promotes stability and prevents judicial overreach, keeping the judicial and legislative branches separate.
So I'll be arguing against Bork, and I argue that the Constitution is a living document, and the federal courts have a crucial role in adapting the law to reflect the ever-changing needs of society. Our Constitution and laws are not fixed. Instead, they are meant to be interpreted in light of contemporary issues and values, and as a result, judges can become activists and interpret the Constitution more loosely to adapt to societal changes and protect individual rights.
And Bork very much disagrees with this. Bork basically says that we should be following what Title V says, that a proposal must be brought to Congress via legislation in order for basically a law to be interpreted differently than it was intended. So basically you have to create an actual law if you want it to, if you want to be able to interpret it as such in the court system.
But policy reforms tend to take a long time, A proposed amendment must be passed by 2/3 of both houses of Congress, then ratified by the legislatures of 3/4 of the state, and in over 200 years, only 27 amendments have been ratified.
And I don't disagree that the process is tedious, but the process is tedious for a reason. There's such a strong, it's, without it, its words would be deemed meaningless. So if you would just have judges basically coming up with how they feel based on the times, you're gonna have, it's not gonna be consistent throughout time, and you're also going to have this cloud, this like dark storm cloud, basically saying that what our Constitution is, this strong structure, is all of a sudden gonna slowly start falling apart.
And I argue that society evolves as time progresses, and judicial activism allows for a more responsive legal system that can better serve the diverse and improving needs of society. Waiting for legislative action on every single issue can lead to long periods of injustice. Judicial activism can be a catalyst to promote legislative change, taking part in the democratic process and responding to the palpable needs of society.
The thing with this is that at the end of the day, that is not the judicial branch's place. That's a problem with the legislative branch and the system itself that needs to be fixed, but it doesn't give the right to the judges to just be able to interpret as they wish. We're going to go into our second argument, dealing with judicial activism versus judicial overreach. Wow, okay. So just to start, the new at Bork, like I said before, he very much strongly believes in the neutrality of a law. He gives an example with the 14th Amendment. Its wording is general enough to where political judging is not necessary. As it states, no state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to anyone within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. And that is the 14th Amendment. If we go by the words of the amendment, it is neutral enough to apply to everyone. If we went by original intent, it would only apply at times to certain people, which is why it's very important for Bork to interpret by text and not by original intent, which is the original, what the founding fathers had intended, which is also a position that can be taken, but he made sure to very strongly state that it needs to go by the original text and wording.
Being that the laws are neutral, a judge has every right to adapt them to the specific cases as they see fit. It's impossible, as Dean Paul Brest states, no form of constitutional decision-making can be salvaged if its legitimacy depends on satisfying Bork's requirements that principles be neutrally derived, defined, and applied. It is no surprise that society evolves. Judicial activism doesn't mean judges should create laws out of thin air. It means they should interpret existing laws in a way that addresses contemporary challenges.
And I agree with this. They should be interpreting law within a modern society. But the difference is that they need to follow the law. If a law is so outdated that it's creating tension, that's where legislation needs to step in and create a law and not just have, I see we're almost out of time, and not just have judges willy-nilly coming up with different things.
Okay. So the judicial branch is not elected by the people, so it cannot be swayed by the people, and as a result, it may support minority rights. An example is the landmark decision of Roe v. Wade. The Supreme Court decided that the right to privacy implied in the 14th Amendment protected abortion as a fundamental right. This may be dubbed judicial overreach, as some may interpret abortion as an action that is not protected by privacy rights. But such judicial activism safeguarded rights that were not represented in legislature and interpreted according to the current and evolving political climate.
So, as we both agree on this, that Roe v. Wade was judicial overreach, and that is why we ended up having Dobbs v. Jackson, another case that ended up being able to overturn Roe v. Wade, which was they overturned a 40-year precedence. And this just goes to show how you're not creating a concrete structure when you have things that can just be overturned after 40 years because because basically times change and politics change, and people decide to go with the times in a way, and the judges kind of are swayed by that, and that's a big problem. We can see here, some nice, pretty pictures that, because we are almost out of time, we will skip past.
Some positive consequences of judicial activism include rulings that promote fairness, protect civil rights and liberties, and reject injustice. Example is Brown versus Board of Education in 1954, arguing that segregation of schools was unconstitutional. This was a landmark case where the court found that in the field of public education, the doctrine of separate but equal has no place, finding separate educational facilities to be inherently unequal. Therefore, overturning the previous court decision of Plessy versus Ferguson from 1896, a case where the court held that state-mandated segregation laws did not violate the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment.
So as we can see here, this was a good thing, but the difference is that, for example, in 1964, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was created, and that went through legislature, the proper means, and it's now it's a fundamental part of our Constitution, which just shows that going through legislation and the proper means just creates more stability. I think we will end it there because we are out of time.
Yeah.
So thank you everyone for
Thank you.
listening to this. Yeah, okay. Yeah, okay.
We have time for literally one question. We're 15 minutes behind now. Just one. How would this square with how language and, because you said with textual interpretation, how does that square with the way language changes over time and meanings of words change over time?
Yes, so, and according to Bork, what he ends up saying is that it's still, the way that it was defined, the word was defined at the time that it was created, that is how you have to go and interpret it. So I guess get a dictionary and really see what it says way back when, because you can't go and change just because the words change. That's not how it works.
Thank you very, very much. All right, I'm going to get the run of show. The program has disappeared. I'll be right back. We're going to have a little bit of a change to the. Run of show, and it's Dia and Dina who will start us off. You guys have slides? We do. Come on up. Let's see if we can make sure they run. And I will tell you, because we have 11 presenters, and
We'll definitely try to cut it down.
so no more than like 10 minutes.
Of course. Oh. See, ours is not there. That's not. Is that one the last one? No. Dina and Dea, but it should be fascists in the Balkans. Did we send it?
My Gmail is logged in. I'm just gonna log out.
Oh, yeah, me too. I have a hard drive. Okay.
So you gotta put it in the bottom, and then you're gonna
switch slides through here, right? Thank you.
Okay.
Make sure that you announce to the world who you are. And watch me. Time signal.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, it works. Thank you. No, we haven't. We haven't. Thank you. Should I go on the other side or?
We're good.
Oh yeah. At least until we introduce ourselves. You want me to say something? Or got it.
Oh,
Start.
wait.
You go.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead. Or should I do it? Comment review.
Go ahead. Hello, everyone. My name is Dea Bekteshi,
My name is Dina Ganick.
and today we're going to be presenting on what happened to all the fascists. This is a presentation that we started last semester, and we turned into a podcast series focusing on fascists in the Balkans.
So it might be like kind of weird that like, oh wow, fascism in the Balkans. Where did we get that inspiration? Well, we're from the Balkans. I'm from Montenegro.
And I'm from Albania.
So definitely very centered. So that's where we kind of got our inspiration. Like she said, we were working on a podcast with Professor Remy in his independent study. So this was kind of just a whole semester's long work. So being that we're from there, we really wanted to see what collaboration was like in these countries. And just like a fun fact, Balkan actually comes from the Turkish word Balkan, which means blood and honey. So just to note that.
And so this is our map of the Balkans. You may see maps that differ because some countries consider themselves Balkans, some don't. This is what we focus on. And in the podcast series, we focus on Bosnia, Croatia, Albania, Bulgaria, and Romania, and Montenegro. And yeah, we look at fascist groups within the Balkans and try to see the impact that they had on the Holocaust and World War II. So this is our podcast series, The Forgotten Fascists of the Balkans. And basically within our research, we tried for each nation to look religiously at maps and borders, trying to track what we could find changes within like maps and borders. And we also analyzed documents within the Ottoman era. If you look back at the history of the Balkans, the Ottomans played a big role on it. We then created timelines for each country during each episode, and we tried to find public opinion of these fascist groups because, as we'll talk about later, a lot of their history has been strewed and just erased in a way. And we asked people that we knew, our families, about what they thought of this period, what they know about this period, what they were taught about this period, and learned what they knew about it overall.
So like we said, we did all types of different countries, but the one that we're going to present to you today is Romania. I think there's this one big misconception is that fascism was only born in Nazi Germany and Italy, right? That's a huge misconception. So that's why we're here today to kind of explain it to you. Without these collaborators, without these countries, it would be very hard for the Holocaust to be so widespread at its magnitude, right? So Romania, the fascist group was called the Iron Guard. It was founded in June of 1927 by Cornelia Zilio Cudreanu. If anybody's Romanian here, I don't know if I butchered that, but I will do my best. So yeah, this was basically a Romanian militant revolutionary fascist movement. It was a political party, and it was very strongly anti-democratic, anti-capitalist, anti-communist, and very anti-Semitic, right? So it was inspired by Nazi Germany and fascist Italy, and it basically mirrored their kind of policies and their laws and things like that.
And so the figure that we want to focus on, who we feel like had the biggest impact on Romania and their Iron Guard movement, was Ion Antonescu. He was an officer in the Romanian army who basically made a name for himself during the Peasants' Revolt and during World War I, I'm sorry. And so he was
motivated by Romanian nationalism. He believed in creating a Romania for Romanians. This included at the time East Transylvania and Moldova, which the Nazis promised to Romania. He was also very big on a greater Romania, which included both of these states. He was a big believer in Jew Bolshevism, if anybody is familiar with that. It's basically the thought that all Jews supported Soviet communism, and as we know, the Iron Guard is completely against communism. He launched pogroms such as Yashi and Odessa. These are basically pogroms that targeted Jews and Romani people within Romania. The victims were deported, they were exterminated in masses, and places like Transnistria, they were basically killing fields, mirroring what the Nazis were doing to Jews, except in the Balkans.
So something that's very interesting is that Antonescu was actually put on trial. I'm sure many of you know that this didn't really happen with a lot of people that were kind of carrying out these big laws and stuff. For example, Hitler, we all know that he committed suicide, so he was never put on trial. Adolf Eichmann, I don't know if many of you know, but he was. So these are kind of big stars that it's very important to go through the judicial process, right? This is him, actually. This is I know it's a little blurry, but it's a very significant picture. He's basically kind of stood up on a post with his hands are kind of tied behind his back. Him with many of his other colleagues, but what's very significant is that he was not blindfolded while everybody else was. So he kind of, I think he said a couple of words right before he was executed, right? This picture is very powerful because it shows many things, right? First of all, he was put on trial. That's important. He was put on trial in, I believe, 1946, after the Soviets invaded in 1944. And they obviously found him guilty of war crimes, crimes against peace, humanity, and treason. June 1st is when he was executed.
Yeah, and this is him moments before his death. He was lined up, and he was, as Dina said, the only one who wasn't blindfolded. He basically he didn't have any remorse for his crimes. He kind of just wanted to face his executioners. So I don't know if that was like his last stand of bravery. And now we're going to go into memory. So this is something that we cover in each one of our episodes, the memory of what happened during World War II in the Balkans. Topics like the Holocaust in Romania were kind of distorted during the communist era. Romania became communist in 1947 after there was a coup by Michael I of Romania. And this is kind of what is mainly remembered during the time, is that the fact that Romania switched sides at the end. And after the coup, after communism took over, a lot of this was kind of shifted and changed. Numbers were changed, the amount of victims were changed. And then we have quotes from Romanians that we've taken about what they think of this time. Romanians say, we feel proud. Romanians of that time did their duty. I think the Romanians feel that they did what they had to in order to uphold their statehood. In a time when the Western powers were conceding to Hitler's demands, I guess no one would think that Romania was going to stand against Germany. This is another, I think, something that we see a lot in the Balkans, is the fact that nobody thought to stand against Germany. They did what they had to do to survive, even though that wasn't the right thing to do. That they just wanted to uphold their statehood, as he says.
Yeah, and like I said about misconceptions before, so there's that big misconception that fascism was only found in those big countries. It's false. Another one is that Germans were the only people who persecuted and murdered Jews. That is also false. Without these collaborators, without these other European countries, it wouldn't have been as widespread.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Yeah, and we want. Just wanted to give a special thanks to Professor Remy for helping us throughout this process.
Questions?
We have time for one question, maybe two at the very most.
The hands pop right up. Go ahead.
So I know that your presentation focused specifically on Romania, but throughout the entirety of your research, what would you say is the most interesting thing that you found?
Ooh, most interesting thing.
I mean, I have to give it to like my home country. I feel like learning about what went on at that time, and even while talking to my parents about what went on, a lot of it was just like, oh, none of that happened. Oh, there was no movements. There was no SS guards in Albania. It's not true. It's kind of like, it's interesting to think about like, oh, the present day memory, what happened, and the actual facts. So I feel like when learning about the place that you're from, did all of this, it's sad to see.
I think for me, it's also knowing that there were so many thousands of people that were killed in these countries, right? There was great population of Jews living in all parts of Europe, and the fact that there were many Holocausts basically in these countries was, you know, mind blowing. And if you do like, especially Romania, I believe they have a memorial there honoring, you know, the lives that were lost, and that's the case for with many of these countries. So.
Thank you very, very much.
Sorry. We have a.
Richard, do you have slides?
Don't know where they are, so let me look.
I can just log into my account, or I emailed them to
They should be here then if
to
you did.
Jennifer, but it's not down. It's in Google Slides. Because
Here's
when
there
no,
you
I don't want
are.
to use that.
You don't want to use that.
Because when I download it, it ruins the format. I need to do it from Google Slides.
You could try. It's just going to take a while. Let's go ahead and do it. I'm going to turn this on.
Oh shit! I left my phone. I need my phone to sign in.
Two-factor authentication. She wants to sign in with us. Oh.
Okay, how do I turn that on? Sorry about that. Good evening. My name is Rivka Brisky, and I'm a history major. My presentation today is based on a research paper I wrote entitled A Jewish Homeland with Socialism Too, Eurovision in the Jewish Communist Imagination. On a summer day in 1931, a 15-year-old girl named Mary boarded a ship heading from California to a tiny settlement in the far east of the USSR with her parents and siblings. This settlement was known as Birobidzhan, designated the administrative center of the USSR's Jewish Autonomous Region, or JAR, in 1934. Colonization of this area began earlier, in 1928, and Mary's family was part of a small contingent of foreign Jewish communists who moved there to try and build up a Jewish socialist homeland. Decades later, she wrote a memoir documenting her experiences. In it, she explained that, for her father, quote, Birobidzhan seemed the answer to a dream she did not know he had, a dream of a Jewish homeland with socialism too. As the daughter of Jewish immigrants from Ukraine, former members of the Bund, and active socialists, the idea of building up a socialist Jewish homeland was an appealing prospect to Mary's parents. Yet, after making the long journey to Birobidzhan, they were faced with overcrowding, flooding, disease, and a lack of infrastructure. Like many others who moved to Birobidzhan, they left not long after they arrived, disillusioned not only by material hardships, but also by bureaucratic corruption. While Birobidzhan does technically still exist today, very few Jewish people live there, and Jews have never been the majority population. Moving there, and more importantly staying there, was not a very appealing prospect for most people. Birobidzhan is commonly written about today as a failure, and it's not hard to see why. Yet, that is not the focus of my project. My goal here was to think not about why they left, but why they came. What sparked that desire? How was Birobidzhan imagined by the small group of Jewish socialists and communists who contributed to its construction? Birobidzhan was intended to be a place where Jews would learn to work the land, leave the shtetl and religion behind, and form a secular, modern, communist Jewish identity. Moving to Birobidzhan meant the opportunity to contribute to the building of socialism while escaping the deprivations of the Great Depression. This is a lithograph which depicts some of the hardships that led to the decision to leave behind the US for the USSR. Mary's father, for example, lost his job as a carpenter, leaving their family in a financially precarious situation. Many immigrants to Birobidzhan also had family ties to the former Russian Empire and found meaning in the idea of returning home in order to build up communism there. But the factor that I am most interested in exploring here is the rhetoric that was put forward by Jewish communist publications and organizations. These worked to convince American Jews to help in the colonization of Birobidzhan. And people like Mary's parents, who were already sympathetic to the USSR, were receptive to this rhetoric. For this project, I isolated two major themes which stuck out to me in the way Birobidzhan was conceptualized. The idea of Birobidzhan as the answer to the Jewish question, and the colonization of Birobidzhan as an anti-imperialist alternative to Zionism. To explore these themes, I will utilize as a case study a 1934 article from the Marxist periodical The New Masses, written by Joshua Kunitz, a Jewish communist. For people like Kunitz, Birobidzhan was understood as the answer to the Jewish question. In establishing Birobidzhan and the JAR, the USSR attempted to construct a modern, secular, Soviet Jewry that could exist within the larger framework of the Soviet friendship of peoples, the ideal of all ethnic groups in the USSR living together in harmony, each with their own national languages, schools, and cultures, yet united by a common Soviet identity. The ultimate goal here was to leave nationality behind entirely, but in the meantime, the intent was to give each ethnic group the tools to flourish and modernize within the context of their own national forms. Birobidzhan should be understood as a part of this Soviet project, and also as a potential answer to the larger question of how Jews fit into society and into the nation-state structure. Accordingly, Kunitz wrote that, quote, 17 years of proletarian rule has finally solved the eternal Jewish question, end quote, adding that, quote, Jewish workers in every capitalist country in the world are looking toward the Soviet Union and Birobidzhan as the only bright spots in the otherwise hideously bleak picture of Jewish life. His rhetoric here places an immense significance on what Birobidzhan meant for the future of the Jewish people worldwide, and should be understood within the context of the rise of the Nazi Party in the 1930s. He portrays the USSR almost as a savior of the Jewish people, eradicating anti-Semitism through socialist solidarity. Kunitz also wrote, projecting a sense of emotional depth and personal meaning onto his experiences visiting Birobidzhan, that, quote, in the union of socialist Soviet republics I was home, in the arms of the Soviet proletariat I was safe. In this imagining, Jewish people did not need their own state if they could be fully integrated into the larger Soviet system, while still retaining a sense of cultural Jewishness. The second theme I will address here is the conceptualization of Birobidzhan as a morally and ideologically pure alternative to Zionism. To take a quote from Revolutionary Yiddishland, A History of Jewish Radicalism, proponents of the Birobidzhan project wrote about it as, quote, a revolutionary Soviet alternative to a Zionist colonization chained to the cart of imperialism. This understanding can be seen clearly in Kunitz's article. He differentiates Birobidzhan from Palestine by writing that, quote, the historical decision of the Soviet government is totally different from the notorious Balfour Declaration, end quote, describing the Balfour Declaration as, quote, a war maneuver on the part of the imperialist government of England, which deceived both Jew and Arab in order to keep both of them chained to its imperialist chariot. He imagines Birobidzhan as an unsettled land, ripe for the taking, that, quote, there is no need of wresting the land from anyone, end quote, because, quote, the land is vast, its resources are abundant. This, of course, overlooks the already existent population, but within the context of the image of Birobidzhan being perpetuated, it had to be posited in strict opposition to the colonization of Palestine, as a space where Jewish people would be able to build a homeland within the arms of the Soviet Union, envisioned as a friendship on equal terms between the numerous ethnic minorities contained therein. The question remains, did Joshua Kunitz and the numerous other writers propagandizing Birobidzhan mean what they were saying? Were they blinded by idealism? I would argue that these questions are irrelevant to the larger symbolic image of Eurovision that they put forth into the world through their rhetoric. The narrative of disillusionment and failure often propagated today is one constructed in retrospect, with the long history of Soviet anti-Semitism informing the historical understanding of Eurovision as it was originally perceived by those committed to its vision. With this project, I hope to argue that the commitment, hopes, and ideals of the people who believed in Eurovision are worthy of historical inquiry. To end, I want to point towards a quote from the first book I read when I began research on this project, American Girls in Red Russia by Julia Mickenberg. She wrote, quote, "This narrative of disenchantment clouds our ability to understand the enchantment itself, the real depth of interest, hope, and fascination that the Soviet Union represented for many people, even when those feelings were mixed with a sense of the gap between Soviet realities and ideals." Eurovision was an ideal, and an ideal by definition can only be strived for, never achieved. Yet the desire to build a socialist, anti-imperialist Jewish homeland, however poorly thought out the endeavor may seem in retrospect, mattered to those who believed in it, enough so that many were willing to uproot their lives to work towards making it a reality. To discount that is to do a disservice to the process in favor of the end result. The meaning therein can be constituted through the striving itself, and it is that striving and its ideological and rhetorical underpinnings that I wanted to emphasize in this project. Thank you.
As before, we have time for one or two questions at the most, I'm afraid. I'm so sorry. Please.
Considering the
Oh boy.
what sort of drove you to conduct this?
So I actually started this project about a year, year and a half, 2 years ago. So before everything, it's definitely more relevant today, but I'm not really commenting on the current political climate. There is relevance there, but I'm focusing on the history.
Well, thank you very much, Rivka. Abby. I had your list. Oh, hello. We didn't know. Do you have slides, or what do you got?
Yeah, I have slides.
Okay, so.
I could log into my drive.
Okay, well, I think that might be, gosh, I don't know where it is now.
Oh, you have to wait there.
There it is. So we gotta log you out
Yeah, just the R.
and log out. Sign out.
I was just gonna, everyone's gonna see mine. No.
Just watching you for the time.
Okay. I could start though?
Yeah.
Okay. Hello, my name is Abby Cherry, and I am a student in the Communication Arts, Sciences, and Disorders major. I worked on a project with my mentor, Professor Fredrickson, and arranged a review of research on sign language intervention for children with autism spectrum disorder. While conducting my research focused on sign language intervention in autism spectrum disorder, which I'll refer to as ASD, there were some questions to keep in mind. What is the best intervention method for kids with ASD? How does sign language help kids with ASD? And what do studies actually mean when they say sign language? So what is ASD? ASD is an innate neurodevelopmental disorder that has had increasing diagnoses in recent decades and now affects 1 in 36 children in the US. The disorder impacts the communication aspect of life and is classified as a spectrum. meaning that its impact varies from person to person. For example, a person with a disorder may have no issue producing vocals, while another may have very limited vocals. Typical symptoms of this disorder include difficulties with verbal and nonverbal communication, as well as special interests in repetitive behaviors and patterns that can be restrictive in everyday life. While ASD has no cure, there are steps to be taken for individuals who do seek treatment. Intervention is considered a treatment for ASD. It consists of any steps taken to reach a set goal by an individual and is typically administered by a speech-language pathologist. Not every intervention method works the same for every individual, which is why intervention is based on a patient's motivation, preference, and proficiency. A common intervention method for those with ASD are augmentative and alternative communication devices, such as this one here that displays icons depicting actions or objects and produces speech. Another form of intervention for ASD is sign language. Sign languages are natural languages used by deaf communities. They are full language systems using hand shapes, facial expressions, and body movements for expression. For example, American Sign Language. There are many different sign languages across the world, and they differ from both the signed and spoken languages around them. Sign language intervention, however, typically refers to manual gestures used in isolation, not as part of a rich, full language system. Sign language used this way can benefit individuals with ASD, as they may have a harder time processing auditory information and sign language is taken in visually. Signs can also be held static in a way and can be iconic. For example, the sign tree, which when just spoken there's nothing to refer to visually, but when signed there's something to refer to, and it also does resemble a tree. So how well does sign language work as an intervention for individuals with ASD? It has been found to be useful, but studies can be difficult to compare because sign language does not always mean the same thing across studies, and studies often use few participants. I completed a literature search in order to identify relevant studies. I searched the keywords sign language or manual signs, and autism or autistic, and intervention across 3 databases between the years 1979 to 2024. The search yielded 572 results, 18 of which I discarded as duplicates. I reviewed the remaining 554 results and discarded results without the full document available and others that were not relevant. I was left with 17 results, which I sorted into 2 charts. This chart shows what each study meant by sign language. Most studies used key terms of a national sign language, while Makaton Sign Language was represented by images of the hand sign, and some studies didn't specify what sign language system they used. This chart shows what each method compared sign language with. There's primary focus on the first 3 methods because they were the most used methods. Total communication is the usage of sign language and speech together. The picture exchange communication system utilizes images of objects or actions, and speech generation devices like the one mentioned previously produce speech for the user. Most studies participants, if not all, had very limited to no vocals when chosen. As shown in the previous charts, the majority of studies used key terms from a national sign language. A quarter of the studies didn't specify what sign system they used, and studies using Makaton signs were more similar to the picture exchange system. Efficacy of sign language intervention was best for total communication, but because of individual differences in motivation, preference, and proficiency for each method, outcomes vary. Total communication had the best acquisition rates and had participants producing more vocals than any other method, but speech generating devices were the most preferred even though proficiency did not match preference. Here's a list of my selected references, and I would like to say thank you to my mentor for all her guidance as well as our librarians for their assistance.
Thank you, Abby. We have time for a question or two if you would like. Please go ahead.
All right. So with those, how effective was there a noticeable difference in effectiveness using a natural sign language, a local natural sign language, versus using other processes?
Yeah, I would say there was, but it was difficult to compare again because, for example, the Makaton Sign Language, they printed out the hand sign on a piece of paper and then they would have the participants present it instead of making the actual hand sign, which was a lot closer to the picture exchange system. So depending on exactly how close their method was to actually using signs, I would say there was a big difference.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Sarah. Come up.
Do you have slides?
Yes, I sent it.
Okay, so that would be, I'm sure it's here.
I think I saw my name before.
Okay.
Yeah, algorithm cave, Dagnias. Yeah,
There we go.
thank you.
What's the matter here? Open. It's a zipped folder?
I think it's a PDF.
That's not. She's coming.
Oh, thank you.
Taking me out of the way. Don't introduce yourself as
Oh, are you Jennifer?
No.
Oh, hi Jennifer. I emailed it to you yesterday.
This is Jennifer, who's organized the whole thing.
Really?
I don't know.
Should I email it again?
No. Just give me one second.
Oh yeah, definitely.
That's, yeah. I don't know why some of these.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much. Oh, great. Thank you. Hi. So I'm going to present on Plato's allegory of the cave. So an introduction. Plato's allegory of the cave is one of Western philosophy's most powerful and enduring allegories. It is found in Book 7 of his book, The Republic, which examines human perception, reality, and knowledge. So, a question that arises is ignorance bliss? While ignorance may seem to suggest a desirable sense of happiness and contentment at first glance, a closer examination reveals the fundamental drawbacks accompanying a life lived in ignorance. So let's start off with a little bit of background on Plato before we get into it. So his dates were approximately 428, 427 BCE until 348, 347 BC. He was an ancient Athenian philosopher and pupil of the father of Western philosophy, also known as Socrates. He was a founder of the Academy, a college of philosophy in Athens where Plato used to teach, and he was a metaphysical dualist, meaning he believed in two worlds: the world of ideas or eternal forms, like beauty, knowledge, the good, it's all part of one, and the world of opinion, matter, and change, the physical world in which we live in. And he wrote a few texts like the Republic, Symposium, and 5 Dialogues. So, overview on the allegory. So the setting is a dark cave where prisoners have been chained to since birth. The scenario is prisoners are compelled to watch shadows cast on the cave wall from objects passing in front of the fire behind them. However, one prisoner is freed and discovers that the shadows are not reality. Okay, explanation. So as I said, in the cave, prisoners are chained to to a wall in the dark cave, perceiving only shadows cast by objects passing a fire behind them. The cave symbolizes the world of sensory perceptions, where what we see and hear may not reflect the true reality. The escape. So one prisoner is freed and ascends out of the cave into the sun's blinding light, representing the journey from ignorance to knowledge. This painful and transformative experience signifies the philosopher's pursuit of knowledge beyond mere appearances. The return. Enlightened by the truth, the freed prisoner returns to the cave to enlighten the other prisoners, but faces rejection and ridicule, resisting new ideas and the challenge of education, emphasizing the philosopher's duty to convey enlightenment despite the difficulties of doing so. The road to enlightenment. The journey from the dark cave to the sunlit world mirrors the philosopher's path from ignorance to knowledge. The allegory emphasizes the difficulty of conveying knowledge to those accustomed to darkness, suggesting that people may resist enlightenment and prefer to remain unaware because it is familiar and comfortable, even if it means living in pain and delusion. However, Plato suggests genuine happiness lies in the quest for knowledge and understanding. Okay, so the noble pursuit of knowledge echoes from Plato's allegory. So The Examined Life by Robert Nozick. Many of you may be familiar with The Matrix, which is a cinematic adaptation of the text. Here, Nozick presents his thought experiment of the experience machine, a device capable of providing individuals with any desired experience. And he argues that despite the machine's ability to stimulate a life of pleasure and fulfillment, individuals would reject the offer, preferring to experience reality as it is. He writes, quote, "We care about more than just how things feel to us from the inside. There's more to life than feeling happy. We care about what is actually the case. We want our beliefs, or certain of them, to be true and accurate. We want our emotions, or certain important ones, to be based upon facts that hold and to be fitting. We want to be importantly connected to reality, not to live in delusion. What we want and value is an actual connection with reality," unquote. He implies that true happiness cannot be achieved through artificial means or ignorance of reality. The experience machine challenges the notion that ignorance or pleasure leads to bliss, suggesting that authentic experiences are essential for genuine happiness. Utilitarianism, John Stuart Mill. John Stuart Mill wrote, "It is better to be a human being dissatisfied than a pig satisfied, better to be Socrates dissatisfied than a fool satisfied." Even with utilitarianism and one of their doctrines, the greatest happiness principle, where an act is morally right if it maximizes happiness and minimizes pain, Mill is not reducing human pleasures to that of a swine in utilitarianism. Mill recognizes qualitative differences in pleasures. Higher pleasures such as intellect, reasoning abilities, and lower pleasures such as bodily, physical-based pleasures. According to Mill, anyone who has experienced both would always favor higher pleasures over lower pleasures. And that's probably due to pride, with love for power, liberty, independence, and our sense of dignity. Finally, Story of the Good Brahmin by Voltaire. Here, the Brahmin conveys that he would prefer to be wise and live miserably than not to think and live happily. Being exposed to knowledge and philosophizing is an escape from being a content automaton, and although it is a struggle and endeavor, it is not something he would forsake. Conclusions. So, while ignorance is bliss may be perceived as a pragmatic response and may offer a shallow form of happiness and a fleeting sense of comfort in avoiding undesirable truths, it ultimately hinders personal growth and fulfillment. Choosing to ignore or saying you would rather not know maintains compliance with societal injustices, stifles intellectual curiosity, and limits human potential. Although it may provide a false imaginary sense of security, it comes at the cost of genuine reality, knowledge, and progress, stifling reality and the cave's shadows. Humans desire an escape and exposure to knowledge, leading to a gratifying sense of growth, learning, and understanding of themselves and the world, transcending the walls of ignorance and approaching the light of knowledge. Thank you.
We have time for a question or so on the allegory of the cave, or its contemporary literary resonance, filmic resonance.
Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, that should be it. Yeah, that should. Thank you. I can just unmute. Okay, thank you. Hi, my name is Miguel. I'm going to be presenting about the Coordinadora Arauco Mayeco, which I'll be referring to as the CAM. They're an indigenous resistance group in my home country of Chile that is made up of the Mapuche people. The Mapuche people are the largest indigenous group in Chile, and their name translates to the people of the earth in Mapudungun. The Walmapu is their ancestral territory. And content warning before we begin, I'm going to be talking about some police brutality and police violence. So my research is centered around the CAM's political framework and their beliefs in land, environment, and power, and how those concepts interact with one another. By power, I do mean political legitimacy. The CAM rejects the legitimacy of a lot of the Chilean state's claims to the Walmapu and the corporations and the neoliberal government that they support. In order to understand the CAM, we need to understand Mapuche history. The Mapuche have the distinction of being the only indigenous group in Latin America to successfully resist Spanish colonialism. And they did it under the leadership of men like Lautaro, who was a legendary Mapuche commander. The Chilean Republic then declared its independence and engaged in the pacification of the Araucanía, which is their euphemism for the genocidal campaign that reduced Mapuche land to 6% of what it once was and plunged the people into decades of rural poverty. Reformist governments like the Unidad Popular, led by Salvador Allende, a Chilean socialist, sought to solve these problems by providing land grants to Mapuche families who had legitimate claims to the land. And while that more legislative approach was being taken, there was also a direct action approach. Over here we have a photo of Campamento Lautaro. This was a land takeover done by Mapuche radicals in the MIR, the leftist revolutionary movement, and the MCR, not the band, the Campesino revolutionary movement. When Salvador Allende was overthrown by the CIA-backed coup of Augusto Pinochet, Pinochet did a lot of neoliberal fascist things like selling off indigenous land to corporations that would later become forestry companies. And the MIR resisted them. That's where we get to this man, Hector Yaitul. He was in the MIR. He was also in the Manuel Rodriguez Patriotic Front, which is a different Chilean revolutionary group, and now he's the leader of the CAM. So we're focusing on the state of the CAM struggle today from 1988 to 2024. I focus on three of their methods. The sabotage of forester company infrastructure has caused hundreds of millions of dollars in damage to major forester companies like Mininco, and forestry is the second largest export industry in Chile. So this is a pretty significant kind of action. They also target modern colonists. This is the targeting of resorts on ancestral land, hotel chains on ancestral lands, and also large wealthy landowners and farmers. There are also private landowners with personal houses that they target. Like this is I believe it is a summer home that was destroyed. They've also targeted childhood homes of these colonists, so it's definitely their most controversial tactic. Once these lands are recuperated, the CAM will settle Mapuche families onto the land. This is the direct land back method that they approach. They don't want to interact with the Chilean state or any of its official, what they view as to be not legitimate institutions. And a lot of the families that they resettle don't have access to running water or internet or electricity, but they do have access to their ancestral land. And that to me legitimizes them as a serious political movement. The land is what's motivating. The state has largely responded by classifying the CAM as a terrorist organization. The Boric administration, the supposedly progressive or left-wing government, classify their actions as terrorist attacks. There is a cyclical interplay of legitimacy and violence. The Chilean state uses violence to legitimize itself and then uses its political legitimacy to legislate and litigate more state violence. The media and corporate and state media have started to use the phrase narcoterrorista or narco-terrorist, which is to me a very silly, made-up phrase. There's no evidence that the CAM has engaged in drug dealing. And we may find it a little bit silly, but it does have deadly consequences. This is Pablo Marchant Gutierrez. He was 29 years old when he was shot in the head by a carabinero or military police officer during an action against Mininco by the CAM. He received a Huechafe or Mapuche warriors' funeral rites. He shared funeral rites with the Mapuche warriors that fought against the Spanish during colonial times. Again, the CAM views itself as the inheritors of a centuries-long struggle against colonialism, and that again legitimizes them, to me, as a serious political movement. What we can learn from this: our environmentalism must be decolonial. This is a previous version of the slide. Our environmentalism must be decolonial. Indigenous resistance is justified, and it occurs on the defensive, in defense of indigenous lands from colonialism. When we ask questions like, do you condemn Hamas or do you condemn the terrorism of the CAM, we need to answer the questions, whose land is it really, and whose violence gets to be legitimized under a colonial political structure? Maybe we should be protesting differently. Maybe we should be taking cues from indigenous people who want to focus on land back. We can focus on the Biden administration and on carbon taxes for fossil fuel companies all we want, but at the core of this is focusing on indigenous rights. That's all I have for you today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Miguel. Do we have questions? Question or two, please.
What would you say is the role of capitalism in fighting it? If you're talking about the legitimacy of land, how does that kind of delegitimize what your thoughts and what society about land?
So that's like a 200-year-old question. I'll try to summarize it. Under a neoliberal capitalist framework, the Walmapu is better off in the hands of companies like Mininco that extract natural resources and exploit the local population for cheap labor. The Mapuche and this approach to communal land ownership and community land ownership and living off the land without internet, that is inherently anti-capitalist, and that's why they're so against this kind of land back process. That's why the socialist governments and the more reformist liberal governments have always been trying to wind down the kind of incessant neoliberal colonialism. Any other questions?
Time for one more. Seeing no hands, I offer my thanks.
Thank you so much. Oh, and by the way, special thanks to Professor Mitchell for helping me with this research for the past year.
The next person up on my list is Johnny.
I sent you it, but just in case I have a hard drive.
Okay.
Let's try that one. No, the second to last one.
This one? Shapen?
Mm-hmm. Oh my god. This is what happens when I'm well known. Everyone's gonna target me.
Yeah, bring in your hard drive.
The hard drive?
Yeah. In the bottom. Oh, it just came off.
Trying to.
You're in. You're good.
Hey. Well, hello everybody. We're gonna continue with our Soviet talk. Yay, big talk. So, I hope everyone's ready. I'm gonna be presenting a smaller project, I'm sorry, of a bigger project I've been doing with Professor O'Keefe. So, I'm gonna give you an overview of what I've been doing with this small presentation. So, this study first began with my interest in education. I was always been taught that the Soviet Union have always been beating us in education. So I was like, okay, where's the facts? Where's the arguments to back this up? So Professor O'Keefe, she gave me a bunch of these books. I love her to death, and they were very hard books to read. And I found the evidence. So this is what I'm going to present today. We're going to first begin in the early Bolsheviks because we need to know the background in order to go to the early 1960s. So I'm going to break up this presentation into 5 categories: the background, Soviet education, those who benefit from Soviet education system, and the conclusion. So background. We need to know the background before and I teach you guys anything history related. So one of the first early Bolshevik goals was to get rid of illiteracy. It was well known when they took over. A lot of them were very illiterate. They didn't know how to spell their name. They didn't know how to read, and that was a big problem. So after the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917, one of the 3 main things they wanted to do was promote this launch extensive school campaign to eradicate illiteracy among the population. These schools were used to break away from tradition and values of old society, which considered backwards. This is one of the second goals of the early Bolshevik goals. They wanted to teach them and get rid of their old backwards tradition. The third thing they wanted to do with these schools was teach them communist ideology. And that's where my second point comes up. The production of books, education for modernity. So, from the late 1920s until Stalinism, a great number of authors became involved in fulfilling the party's command to draw young generation's attention to agenda of industrialization and becoming modern. Some of the ideas that were promoted in these books was to prepare children to become Soviet ideology. They want to practice of Soviet ideology so they will become a loyal, active communist. In some of these books that I read, such as The ABC of Communism, they show the history of the Bolshevik Revolution, where they are seen as they were the heroes. And in the end of the book, they were building a new society and they needed to break away what was considered backwards. As you see in this quote, Vladimir Lenin stated, "Give me just one generation of youth and I'll transfer the whole world." So, it's my second point, Soviet education. What was being taught in schools? So, once Lenin took over, he implemented the NEP, the New Economic Policy, which promoted a lot of schools in urban and rural areas, ensuring that children in all backgrounds had the opportunity to receive an education. Eventually, it became a law that it was a universal law that became mandatory for both urban and rural areas of the Soviet Union from the early 1930s to 1931. So if you had any children, they had to be in school. So let's see what was in the curriculum. So many teachers were allowed to let these students play certain games called red versus white. Red versus white. So at a young age, they were taught to play this game. They were teaching them history of early Bolsheviks. So red versus white was for them to become little secret soldiers, as you see in this image. These little secret soldiers where they wanted them to de-announce their own friends. Another game they would be taught, it was called Good and Bad. So this is like another version of red and white. It just basically allows secret organization with school students, with their comrades. This made them watch their own friends to be able to de-announce them, anyone going against the state. So the Young Communist League. This was seen as a big thing for Soviet history. So if you were accepted to this Young Communist League, it was a direct access to becoming part of the Communist Party. You might say, what is so interesting in the Communist Party? Well, I'm going to explain to you. If you were accepted into the Young Communist League, you had a guarantee to gain more advantages than others. That would be better jobs, better pay, not to work a lot, and then, as you're going to see in my third slide, we're going to see how those who benefited from the education system. Oh, it kind of split off, but basically it said those who benefited the Soviet education system. So, education was being pushed heavily during rural and urban areas, one big key takeaway of education was it got rid of working in the collective farms. So once Lenin had passed away, Stalin took over and he promoted this 5-year plan. 5-year plan where they had to industrialize very quickly and do collective farms. So if you would consider a kulak or a son or a daughter of a kulak, you would have to grow all these grains. But because education was seen such a vile opportunity to learn, if you were a kulak's son or daughter, you were able to go to education. Another key thing about who benefited was gender equality. One of the early Bolsheviks' goal was to spread early gender equality to everyone. So women were given more access to work, they gained more opportunities, where you're going to see in my next slide. So this is a perfect example. Her name is Jahan Obidova. She was from Uzbekistan. She basically grew from nothing. At an age of 9, she was sold to a 50-year-old. And then during 1918, when the Bolsheviks first began invading Uzbekistan, she saw an opportunity to break away. And as I said earlier, Uzbekistan was promoting these schools, and she was accepted in. And in this school, she was able to learn, read, and speak Bolshevik, meaning she was able to learn Russian and gain more access. So she will eventually get accepted to the Young Communist League, meaning she was very close to becoming to the Communist Party. So in the Communist Youth League, she started to denounce other civilians of her town, telling them like, oh, why are you going against the state? They're giving us opportunity. You should be with us and not going against the Bolsheviks. She eventually got accepted to become a Communist Party where she would be there until the end of 1970, where she will be denounced because she wasn't seen as a full woman because she would never remarried or have children. But that is another side note of my fuller paper. So, conclusion, to wrap up my summary, the key points I want to explain was education was promoted to help and get rid of all these illiterate people. But the big question is, who was left out? What are the disadvantages? So when I was making this presentation, I want to give you 3 examples who was at a disadvantage. The kulaks of the children. So if you were a kulak, yes, you were able to go to school, but you will have to pay back the state. So if you have no money, you have to go back to the farm to pay those taxes. Another disadvantage was if you were a kulak, you were seen as enemy of the state. So if you were in school and your parents were seen as enemy of the state, you were automatically kicked out, losing that advantage of getting an opportunity. The third disadvantage was they were promoting all these books, but none of them were in their own proper language. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Sophia? Do you have slides?
Yes. Can I log into Gmail?
Hope so. It's been an issue. Let's see if we can log him out. No. This is why I'm going to get out of the way. Do you see yours?
No,
Oh.
but I have newer ones that I emailed to myself.
Oh, so you know when is it is? Okay.
Yeah. If that's okay.
So, oh, I guess you need that though. So you want to be
Can I log into Gmail?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Cool.
Do you know how I pull this up as a slideshow? Like, how can I?
Like getting it on,
Yep.
that's the question? That one I can do.
Oh, okay, cool. Well, okay, I guess I'll have to scroll down. Okay, hi everyone. My name is Sophia, and I am an urban sustainability student concentrating in environmental science. So this might get a little bit more sciencey than you all might have imagined. And I did research on understanding the impact of sea level rise on Crab Meadow, a coastal wetland that is located in the Long Island Sound estuary, using data collected from 2018 to 2022. So, as we all know, since the mid 20th century, climate change is real. Global temperatures are driving significant changes in climate patterns, which is causing ice to melt, sea levels to rise, and has overall posed many threats to coastal and marine ecosystems. Which is why there's a lot of local impact and significance to this, because as we all know, climate change does affect us directly, which is why information like this is very important. And we have a microcosm on Crab Meadow because the Long Island Sound is a very huge ecosystem, as you will see. And we are able to show the acute impacts of climate shifts in these wetlands in terms of the entire wetland itself. So a little bit about wetlands. Wetland ecosystems provide many critical services, including water purification, flood protection, nurseries for flora and fauna, and they also serve as buffers against climate variability, and they enhance resilience to coastal areas. So wetland vulnerability is happening now because of climate change, where it has exposed these wetlands to risks such as submersion, salinity intrusion, high variability in temperatures, and which is all threatening the structural and functionality of these wetlands. Again, which is why information like this is very important. So a huge role of wetlands is also this ability to accumulate sediment. So as water is pushing in and out of the shoreline in these wetlands, we have sediment that is accumulating but also eroding, right? We have those double factors happening at the same time. But sediment accretion is important specifically because it does help support elevation in wetlands, which is very important since wetlands do form, or at least are sectioned off based on their various elevations, which determine what flora and fauna get to thrive in those different spaces. And factors that are affecting accretion rates are issues in sediment supply, again, higher sea level, which is causing more water to be pushed in and out of the shores, tidal dynamics, and once again, human disturbances. And without having that sediment accretion, we do risk losing our sediment deposition in these wetlands, which can make them convert to open water, causing a loss in habitat, a decreased carbon sequestration, which we all know is very important, and diminished flood protection. In this research, it's also very important to note that there is a difference between global and regional climate change. So a lot of the time when we think about climate change, we think about global climate change, which is the sea levels rising due to thermal expansion of seawater from glaciers melting and ice caps. However, regionally, especially in places like New York City, we are affected by something called GIA, which is glacial isostatic adjustment, which is this variation, as you can see in this image, that has been caused due to New York City forming on a glacier. That pressure of the glacier has caused sediment to sink, so now we have sediment moving back to its displaced areas, causing land to rise and sink, and making the ocean appear further or closer depending on what is happening in your area. So it can get very confusing, but it is something very important because it does help us understand, is sea level rise actually happening, or is our beach just slowly leaving us, or our wetland in this case? So just to put the focus back on the Long Island Sound, so the Long Island Sound is about 1,100 square miles that is between New York and Connecticut, and it serves as an ecosystem to over 1,200 species of invertebrates, 170 species of fish, and many migratory birds that pass through North America as they go from north to south. And it's a huge space for community activities. It supports commercial and recreational fishing, and it's also a part of the Atlantic Intercoastal Waterway, all of which affect human activity and human life. So the crab meadow ecosystem is a much smaller portion of a crab meadow itself. As you can see, it's a really small little piece of beach across all of New York and Connecticut. And its biodiversity is very important because it's one of the only wetlands that we have left in New York City that is mostly undisturbed, with the only disturbance really being things like a boardwalk and a massive golf course behind it, actually. But it is a space that hosts a huge area of suited vegetation and salt marsh that we need to work very hard to keep. And as we all know, we do need some indigenous acknowledgement. This land was acquired from the Mantancock tribe in 1656, and Crab Meadow has slowly been able to transition from colonial lands to public conservation areas, with it being part of many Long Island Sound research projects. So a little overview, like I said, it is a huge, did I have this slide twice? Oh, I wanted to show you guys how different it looks now. Look at that, there you go. So some ecological zones that we might find in Crab Meadow is, again, there's many places of, or many sections of marshes that we might find here, a lot of them being tidal wetlands and upland areas as they move back into inland. And conservation areas are very important. We also have many threats to this area, such as sea level rise, ecological shifts, land use development, and there is, again, an extreme importance of monitoring. So some research questions that we have, obviously there are many here, but some main ones I think I could show you by highlighting is, how has Crab Meadow maintained its elevation relative to rising sea levels? Has the wetland maintained its effectiveness in providing ecosystem services such as flood protection, water purification, and carbon sequestration? Does Crab Meadow have the potential to migrate inland in response to sea level rise? And what changes have occurred to the size of the marsh over time? And a lot of this data has been done using 3 specific ways of collecting data. We have been able to use SCTs, which are surface elevation tables, to monitor elevation and sediment. We have done longitudinal analysis, which is just drone and aerial photography measuring, or really taking pictures of the marsh over the years so we can analyze how the size has changed. And then also comparing land use maps with GIS in order to see if the marsh actually has space to move further in. So we have been finding that elevation is increasing in the marsh, so sediment accretion is happening, but we really wanted to see if the marsh has the ability to sustain itself in the long term, which it is not. The marsh would have to rise about 17.2 millimeters in order to keep up with rise in elevation over the years, as sea level has been shown to increase at a rate of 4.3 millimeters per year, which is not a lot in theory, but it actually is a lot when we look at the global perspective. And some very quick conclusions are, over the 4 years, again, the marsh does need to rise in order to keep up with sea level, so we are at risk of losing this marsh. Elevation data has been able to show an upward trend. However, the data set is limited and spans over a relatively short geological time span. As we all know, climate data does need to be taken over 50 to 100 years in order to be able to understand. So future work that this might cause is, obviously we have more questions to answer, and this is all research that is not finished yet, but I do know I'm out of time, so thank you. Yeah.
We have time for a question or so. I got one. What mitigation can we undertake in order to protect marshes such as this?
Well, a lot of the time it's really like, a lot of the time we do need these spaces. Like, wetlands have been impacted by anthropogenic activity, anthropogenic meaning human activity so much that we really do need conservation areas, which really do take human activity out of those spaces. We need more environmental programs focusing on actually remediating these areas and installing vegetation that is likely to be found in marshland, which is something that Brooklyn College does if anyone ever wants to participate. And also, like, knowing about these places, right? Brooklyn College is part of the Jamaica Bay watershed. Jamaica Bay is a huge wetland that we also have in New York. It's actually not too far off from the train from us. And it's just a really great place to learn about all the things that we have going on in New York City, how we can actually conserve these wetlands. And I mean, as a presentation told us, like, ignorance is not always that bliss. Like, educate yourself on what is happening, stay relevant, and be great.
Oh, Jake? Oh, Jake.
Ooh. Oh, how can I close this? How can I close this?
I got it.
Oh, you got it.
Oh, sorry. You
Do you have
ate that? I don't think so. Oh, yes, I'm just logging into the.
Oh, so you didn't send the picture?
Oh, no, I have it on. Or it's not like as a PowerPoint. Just a moment. Okay. Alright, sorry. Okay, cool. Alrighty. Okay, yeah, we're good. It's time. All right, first I want to thank you all for being here, especially if you don't need to be. So, exposing the mind virus, as it were. I don't believe this, by the way, but Elon Musk called it that. Combating woke ideology through social media. So, let's dive in. So, America is currently undergoing what I like to refer to as a woke scare. It is the fear of the encroaching threat of wokeness, much like the Red Scare with communism, the Lavender Scare with LGBTQ plus people. And while this fear and opposition is certainly present and widespread, it's unclear as to what exactly is being feared. And this ambiguity has allowed politicians to weaponize the term as kind of a catch-all. You can see good old Ron DeSantis with the anti-CRT signs. That's another term for woke. You'll hear woke, CRT, DEI is the big one right now. And my research question is simply, how is wokeness defined and combated through social media? Because social media has given individuals a platform like they've never had before. So first, I want to go into a literature review. So the DeSantis administration defines woke as the belief that there are systemic injustices in America and the need to address them. This definition is actually expanded upon from the original term, which is an AAVE phrase meaning a higher level of consciousness to racial inequities like police brutality, redlining, just kind of being more aware of how people are treated and how it's like not really equitable. And anti-woke ideology, people find this and it often leads them down to conspiracy theories. My mom actually fell down the conspiracy rabbit hole into QAnon. And I want to talk about QAnon for a bit. So Q is a very interesting conspiracy theory because they operate based on what's called religious apophenia. So they basically, apophenia is the phenomenon of finding two unrelated things and perceiving connection. So a way that this will work is Q will make a post on March 16th with the name John, and then their followers would think John 3:16, and they would find like a Bible verse, and they would answer their, like, because Q drops little hints, so this would answer that themselves. And this is a big problem because it's not just consuming information anymore. The people who consume this have a personal stake. They are like soldiers in this great mission, so it's a matter of ego as well. And conspiratorial rhetoric in social media, probably the biggest way we see conspiracy rhetoric get spread is memes. And you can see I called it a Trojan horse. Memes are very digestible. They're bite-sized. You can see a ton of them all at once, and you can consume without thinking. There's a lot of bad stuff that can be communicated in memes. You may remember our good friend Pepe the Frog of the late 2010s. So he's not explicitly like a hate symbol. He was declared one, but he ended up being appropriated by a lot of white supremacist groups, a lot of particularly just like not the best kind of portrayals. And you can see here it's being used in a Green Lives Matter sign to kind of diminish the efforts of Black Lives Matter. My methodology is simple. So it's a thematic analysis of a prominent anti-woke Twitter or X account at End Wokeness. And I conducted this using inductive reasoning, meaning I went in and let the data speak for itself rather than going in with a theory. 10 tweets were selected from April 1st to April 14th, 2023, documenting the time when transgender influencer Dylan Mulvaney starred in a Bud Light ad, which got a lot of controversy. April 1st marks the debut of the ad, and April 14th marks the Anheuser-Busch CEO making a statement. This is just one of the 10 tweets you can see here with the YouTuber Chris Tyson, a member of Mr. Beast's crew, who had recently transitioned to a lot of differing opinions. And so what I did was I went in and I found my meeting units and I kind of coded them by color. So you can see here the red is all anti-LGBTQ sentiments. The blue is kind of this idea of falling from former glory. Orange is also is mocking unconventional appearances, mainly fat phobia. Purple is kind of describing it as like a viral infection of sorts. Green is actually interesting because it's less of a meaning unit and it's more of a unit for how they attack things. And because this was centered around the Bud Light campaign, a lot of people would malign Bud Light and align themselves with Coors. So there would be like a meme about Riley Gaines, like all Coors, Riley Gaines beer, all guts, no nuts. And stuff like that is absurd, but it actually shows this kind of like demand for partisanship from companies. So you can see our final meaning units here are rejection of what's healthy, which actually ended up being the case for both the anti-LGBTQ and this kind of like body positive stuff, because that is kind of coalesced under an idea of rejecting what's healthy. We have destroying American ideals, like I said, corporate maligning as a kind of method to combat it, and insincere, this idea that they're fake about social justice, that they only care about appearances. So here are those final constructions again. Another method I didn't talk about as much is exposing perceived contradictions, which is basically just kind of poking holes in what they believe are flaws. So where do we go from here? So it's important to know what woke means because politicians have been doing this for years, taking advantage of terms that they use as a catch-all. Like I said, McCarthyism and the Red Scare was ever present in our society for like years. And it's important to know exactly what woke means and its many forms so we know how to combat it and what exactly they're talking about. And also, as we become more partisan just by the nature of social media, I find it interesting that people are kind of starting to call on corporations to pick a side. People felt very betrayed by Bud Light because they're like, we're the working man's beer. How could you betray us and promote queerness and like stuff like that, like this woke scam? And people are going to soon want like partisan companies. And it draws the question of, will corporations like take this data and draw partisan lines, or will they try and stay as nonpartisan as possible? Future research, which I'm going to talk about in a bit, is I would like to analyze platform-specific cultures. So stuff like Reddit and 4chan are typically a little more right-leaning, while Tumblr is a lot more left-leaning. And I think it'd be great to see thematic analyses or digital ethnographies conducted of certain platforms to kind of trace what rhetoric comes from what platform, what cultures exist where. And yeah, so just some limitations. So just the time period of this being a academic study it was a semester-long thing for a class I did last year. Shout out Professor Carrillo. And another unfortunate limitation is the lack of intercoder reliability, as that is a common part of thematic analyses. But since I was just doing it by myself, I kind of just dove in. And lastly, just to conclude, amidst this woke scare, understanding what wokeness is and how to combat it is essential. The research presented in this study showcases how a social media platform affects both the construction and how its opposition is spread. And the current media landscape is fraught with misinformation, like we've seen. So it's important to have good media literacy skills to navigate these successfully. And thank you. Thank you for your time. Any questions if we have time?
We do. Jake, go ahead.
One question. Yes.
You know, I actually love that. I actually love the fact that you brought up McCarthy and how this has been cyclical.
Yeah.
I don't know about a lot of you students, but I know the teachers probably remember the 90s and how much like the whole woke thing is reminding me of PC culture.
Yeah.
The whole rally.
Exactly. That is like the predecessor. It's kind of like communist, PC, DEI, woke. It's a catch-all for I don't like this. Get it out of my culture. So anything else? Any other questions, concerns? Again, I want to thank you for your time and for staying so late if you don't have to.
Danny, you're up. You have slides.
Yes, I do.
Ah, you got it right.
All right. Where do I plug it in?
I believe there's a Danny down there.
What?
You want to use the one on the monitor?
Down there?
Yeah, it's easy to do.
Yeah? Okay. Any of them, right? Well, where's... Oh. Sorry. Where do I pick... Where's the...
We have to minimize things, so go ahead and minimize that. Minimize that. Yep, and you could probably find...
This PC?
Yeah.
And where's the presenting thing? Okay. So, my name is Danny Wu. I'm a history major, and my topic will be talking about the myth busting of the model minority myth. Now, the reason why I started this myth is because as a kid, when I was in Brooklyn Technical High School, the majority of the kids on the honor roll were Asian American kids, and I came to this conclusion: is the model minority myth even true? Well, let's find out. Well, the model minority myth was first coined by sociologist William Peterson. He was a sociologist during the 20th century who conducted a study on Japanese Americans. And he came to this conclusion that since the Japanese Americans persevered through the internment camps during World War II, as we all know that indeed happened, and when he conducted data showing that Japanese Americans had above socioeconomic status compared to other minorities, he came to this conclusion that Japanese Americans were the model minority of Americans. Now, according to the U.S. Department Bureau of Labor Statistics, this chart shows that Asian Americans, on average, their average salary increased by 55% compared to other ethnic minorities. Now, based on this data, people would think that the model minority myth is true. However, my case is that the model minority myth is false, and not only false, it can be very harmful. Now, one data that agrees with my point is the economic inequalities that happen among all Asian Americans. Now, if you look at this chart right here, if you exclude Chinese Americans and Indian Americans, other Asian Americans such as Burmese Americans, Mongolians, Bangladeshis, and Pakistanis earn significantly less than Indian Americans and Chinese Americans. Now, this goes to show that the model minority myth isn't true because you're overly generalizing data points that don't count for every single Asian American race that's besides Chinese Americans and Indian Americans. Now, I removed a slide due to the amount of time I've been shortened, and it was basically showing how the Johnson administration and like basically made it easier for Asian immigrants to have access to immigrate into the Americas, stopping this quota system. Now, one reason why I believe we should myth bust the model minority myth is because it negatively affects Asian Americans socially. Now, this is Frank Wu. If you guys think this guy's familiar, he's the current president of CUNY Queens College. Now, basically, what Frank Wu is trying to say is because of the model minority myth, it goes to show that because of this overgeneralization, and furthermore, that it basically pits other minorities against each other. Specifically, the two minorities I will talk about is Asian Americans and African Americans. Now, I understand that the centuries of slavery and Jim Crow laws are not nearly the same as the decades of discrimination that the Chinese have faced. But what we can understand from this is that other minorities, such as Asian Americans, and not just African Americans, but all minorities in general, we shouldn't be quarreling and fighting over social and economic inequalities. In my opinion, we should agree and like stop this like decades long arguments really, because the model minority myth is just really false because of these expectations that Asian Americans are subject to since they go to K through 12 education. Now, speaking of K through 12 education, I'll be talking about a story from Annie Kai. I found this from the Brooklyn libraries, specifically when I went to the website. So, what makes this story so significant is it details how the negative aspects of the model minority myth, specifically authoritarian parenting, otherwise known as tiger parenting. Now, basically, to summarize Annie Kai's experience, Annie was pressured into going into a career of nursing because her parents thought that was a high paying job and it was very well respected. However, Annie Kai did not like nursing. When she was in her freshman year at college, she struggled in her biology courses, and she basically had this like argument with her mother basically because she did not want to pursue nursing. She wanted to pursue economics. However, this idea of choosing CUNY colleges was really dissatisfied from Annie's mother because Annie's mother viewed CUNY colleges as trash. So thankfully, Annie Kai received therapy, and after that, she graduated in a degree in economics. Sadly, not many people were able to have a great ending with Annie Kai because according to the CDC, in 2019, 1 in 4 young adult Asian women commit suicide, which is very shocking and scary because it goes to show that the model minority myth is not only false because you're literally hiding this mental health epidemic that many Asian Americans face. Asian Americans, many of them struggle to face mental health services. As a matter of fact, many of them do not seek help. As a matter of fact, no. Based on these statistics, it goes to show that the reason why this model minority myth is so important to us is because it shows that the model minority myth stereotypes an entire racial race to be only known for their intellect. It undermines their unique experiences. And lastly, it ignores this silent decades of struggle that many Asian Americans face because some of them, not all of them, have tiger parenting, but the ones with tiger parenting are sadly suffering because if they do not agree with this form of parenting, they will only do it for their parents' approval. Now, based on my research, one thing I did find shocking was the statistics. I did not know that this was actually true. And that's it.
We have time for a question or so.
Sorry, yes.
You know, I was going to ask about how some of the immigration policies also affect this. Like, for example, it's obviously much easier to, because moving across countries costs money, and also the way the visa system is set up in the U.S., it's also a lot easier to get here if you already have means of education, opposed to, just starting out here.
Oh, are you trying to just say how some immigrants got here? I have personal experience on that. The reason why my family got here is because my grandmother's sister opened a Chinese restaurant here in New York, specifically Queens, and that's how my parents were able to immigrate here.
Right. I just mean in more modern times, since I want to say the 60s or 70s, when they put in visa requirements for.
Yeah, the Johnson administration, that one. Yeah. Yes. Okay. Any other questions? No?
Well, thank you very much. Then.
Okay, thank you.
And we have one more presentation from Edna. Here she is. Yay.
Sorry.
You have slides. Yeah. Okay.
So you're just gonna have to hear the sound of my voice.
No, it's good. I'm laughing about it. Maybe you come down a couple of times. What we can do is turn off the screen so that it's not distracting.
Okay, hello everyone. So my research project was conducted in the spring of 2022 under the supervision of Professor Bridget O'Keefe in the history department. It's a two-part research project, the first part being a sort of overview of the relationship of identification markers and institutional relational race politics in the Soviet Union, starting in 1937 with the Stalin administration and sort of extending to the entire history of the Soviet Union. And then the second part is a historiography compiled of interviews with my father, and who was a immigrant to the Soviet Union, born to a white Russian mother and a black African father. And so, yeah, that's the sort of overview of my research. I'm just going to be reading some excerpts and I'll answer any questions. Markers of self-identification, a closer look. In the second half of the 20th century, the Soviet Union prided itself as a beacon of hope for all marginalized peoples, both internationally and domestically.
Beginning in the late 1950s, the Soviet Union invited and funded university students from recently decolonized, leftist-leaning governments, training them to read, write, and produce work within the communist agenda. With an influx of students from various African, Asian, Middle Eastern, and Latin American countries, domestic policies about interracial and international marriages also changed and took form around this time period. Beginning in the 1960s, Soviet citizens over the age of 16 could self-identify under a single nationality, solidifying the perspective that the Soviet Union had always been comprised of ethnically distinct groups of people. This was a sharp contrast to the Stalin-era view of ethnicity, in which biological differences between Soviet ethnicities were essentialized without their consent, as the relationship to their ethnic group was tied to the state. And so the center of the ideal Soviet race would be the White Russians, and so they had the sort of the most like comfortable relationship with the state, just like throughout the Soviet Union's history. And then, in an effort to rival the United States' negative view of interracial marriages, Soviet ethnographers during the early Cold War encouraged and positively viewed marriages where participants were of different nationalities. Although the official rhetoric of the Soviet Union was that of a racially inclusive society, countering that of the United States, which banned international marriages and enforced racial segregation with Jim Crow policies, the Soviet Union policies presented their own failings, which greatly impacted the way people of color view themselves, regardless if they were immigrants or natives of the Soviet Union. And so I'm just going to be going into my father's story a little bit. So my father alluded to experiences of compartmentalizing his experiences and his racial identity in official documents of identification. His ambivalence about my questions regarding his personal life made sense, as our relationship was limited by the restrictions of my understanding of Soviet culture. For instance, in my father's Somali passport to enter the Soviet Union, issued in 1989, his race is listed as Somali, his birthplace as Mogadishu, and his mother as a Somali stepmother, despite him being born in Leningrad and to a Russian mother. Although that passport was issued in Somalia, you can sort of see the relationship Somali markers of self-identification had to the Soviet Union, as it was a sort of periphery of the Soviet Union empire. Oh yes, and then I also wanted to talk about the experiences of these institutional policies and how they affected the daily realities of marginalized people both in the Soviet Union and outside of the Soviet Union. So when my father arrived at the People's Friendship University in Moscow, he was subject to gawking and pointing by his Russian classmates when his biracial status had been known. He played these experiences off to me as humorous, explaining that white Russians come from a racially monolithic society and hadn't been exposed to biracial Somali Russians. While I understood his perspective, I was confused at the sort of relationship between, you know, minorities being viewed as zoo animals in a sort of society that was like a beacon of hope and that was courting people from third world countries. I didn't understand that relationship as somebody from the United States who grew up with the idea that you know, waves of migration are forced and we're here as, you know, because we're rejects of our home countries. So I thought that was a really interesting contrast. And so, distinguishing and processing my own biases as an American proved to be challenging but fruitful once confronted. I'd made my own assumptions about the way my father viewed his race, simply due to his sort of ambivalent and invasive responses to my questions regarding his race. But this project helped me contextualize his experience in the Soviet Union, which was more centered on identity markers as like, you know, a part of your role in the Soviet Union and not sort of like
in the United States where your race is an extension of your identity. And so that was also really helpful to understand. Okay, that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Do we have questions about the process, about your findings? Please, yes.
Yes.
I do want to ask about, I think you talked about it in your presentation, but can you talk more about the benefits and limitations of using your father's oral history as a form of research, or rather as like a
Yes, I'm just going to try to succinctly answer your question. So the research was really daunting because it was very theory-based. I didn't understand the comparisons that Stalin-era ethnographers would make about how they didn't want to, subscribe to zoological differences that were emerging in Nazi Germany and in fascist Italy. And so I didn't understand like what that would look like for people of color living in the Soviet Union. And I think that even though he was, again, evasive, ambivalent, not the best subject for my research, it was just a great counterpoint to like, again, like the really like heavy theory and like personal narratives I've been reading by like Soviet writers, and so it just like personalized my research, which was really affirming. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Well, guys, thank you so much, everybody who stuck it out with us to the bitter end. I'm grateful for your presence and contribution, and thank you once again. We're back tomorrow at 9:30.